Yeah, now am I audible?
Yes, you are, Naveen.
Yeah, Naveen,
Okay,
you're on.
thank you, sir. Let's wait for Sanat a minute more. Yeah, just a minute. Sanat is joining in just a minute. He is facing some technical issues and he's joining now. Yeah, he's here. Sanat, am I audible right now? So,
Naveen, you're audible.
yes, sir. So maybe let's begin with the uh, panel discussion now. Sanat, sir, are you there? I think he'll be joining us in a minute. So let's start anyway. We'll continue with him as soon as possible. So yeah, then let's get started with the panel introductions. The first panelist is Mr. Ayush Shah, a leading analytics expert. And I am alumnus. Mr. Shah has been involved in the field of analytics for almost a decade now. He has designed and deployed several models and strategies to solve complex business problems. He owns a vast experience in predictive modeling and decision making tools. He'll be sharing his perspectives on how business analytics is shaping our future and what students can do to prepare themselves to ride that surf rather than being a spectator to it. Following up next is Mr. Niranjan Shende, a finance and marketing analytics paladin with a deep understanding of consumer insights and analytics. He has been working with Kantar, leading data and consumer insights organizations for many years, and now manages the marketing department at ZEC India. He will be sharing his ideas on client analytics, workflows, and operational analytics. Our final panelist is Mr. Sanat Anand, a global champion in quantitative research and advanced analytics. An IIT Bombay alumnus, he has completed his master's in financial mathematics from the MIT Sloan Business School and currently works as a quantitative researcher at Citadel in Chicago. He will be sharing his experiences on analytics and cryptography. So, without much further ado, let's begin through a basic introduction to the theme and then we'll be going through the questions. Analytics is undergoing a revolution in tools, technologies, applications, and its adoption. The industry is rapidly evolving, and organizations are investing large amounts of funding and resources in trying to turn data and analytics into competitive advantage. The challenge is typical during a time of rapid change. Marketing hype hijacks the promise, and venture backed startups make unsustainable or unreasonable claims. Consultancies learn on the client time, and investments are made hastily out of fear of falling behind the competition. Against this backdrop, real disruption is taking place and value chains are being reorganized. In this panel discussion, our industry experts discuss critical issues and challenges, trends in technologies, and the impact on business and public sector organizations. So, beginning with our first question to Mr. Ayush. So, how, according to you, is business analytics fueling innovation in organizations?
Well, now your innovation earlier. Let's talk about a scenario that used to be 15, 20 years ago. There would be a lot of innovation happening across departments, but that nothing would be very systematic or data driven. What has happened or what has changed nowadays is that innovation is now happening through data. We are figuring out at what stage of a customer journey that we'd like to bring innovation in. What stage of when a customer is buying, at what stage is he most likely. Excuse me, can you hear me?
Yeah, you can hear you.
Yes, sir, we can hear you, sir.
Okay. At what stage of a customer journey are we are we going to lose the customer? What is the probability of us what is the customer life cycle value of the customer throughout the customer life cycle? All of these things are then becoming inputs to innovation, uh, in how we are driving or making sure that the customer stays with us. One of the one of the one of the one example that I think is really the best example in such a scenario is the recommendation engine that Amazon brought about. Amazon was seeing that there were a lot of people buying things in bulk. So what Amazon figured out is when somebody is buying X, what are the other things that they are buying if they are buying Y and Z together. So what they started doing is whenever you are putting one thing in a basket, they started recommending you that these are the other things that other people have bought, or these are the things that are bought together. So what happened is a lot of customers starting buying a lot more things on Amazon. The basket size increased, the cart value increased. All of these things together, together drove value for Amazon at a higher level. So this innovation was completely data driven. This is something. This is one of the best examples that I personally feel. The recommendation engine that Amazon perpetuated has been one of the best innovation tools. As an example, for that was a data driven or uh, data led innovation. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir. It does make sense, sir. It is actually important to see how they are bundling the prices, the combinations of different types of offerings and value propositions that they are sending to the consumers. It indirectly impacts their, of course, the profit scheming, the strategies, as well as gaining more type of values to their organization. Mr.
Yes.
Ranjan, sir, being working on data insights for so long, we would like to understand that in terms of how companies can use data analytics to spur innovation, what was the central question or the problem that you were trying to address with your work?
Uh, so Naveen, am I audible? Yeah, I think so.
Yes, sir.
So through my experience, I've understood one major thing. That insights are underrated. That's one thing that everyone is looking for in any type of data. Okay, now companies have data, but what is missing is that ability to soak up that data. Make meaning out of that data. As data is structured and unstructured, and when you combine these two, what we say, dimensions, you get powerful insights. And I think one of the biggest challenges companies face is understood that people equally consume tea and coffee across India. Now the clients had a query that, hey, South India doesn't make sense. South Indians love coffee. So I believe coffee should be more dominant. We can't have an equal distribution of 99% people having tea and coffee both, right? We also were like surprised to see the data in that way. Upon investigation, insights, I'll come to this point also. Upon investigation, we found that uh, Indians would love to start their day with a tea, all right, and then probably have coffee in the office. But tea is like the morning drink for most of the Indians, including South India. Now, to validate that data, we had two layers. One is we again contacted the respondents, asked them that is this true? Yes, it was true. We contacted our offices in South India, including Chennai, Bangalore, Kochi, Hyderabad. We contacted them and we found out the similar trend that in our offices itself, people love starting the day with a tea. Now, this is our insight. Why should the client believe this? yes, we need another data set to explain this. So what we did was we had the world panel data coming in, which actually had exactly the same trend. And when we presented these findings to the client was like, hey, now that makes sense, that everyone loves starting the day with a tea. But there was another query that South India is more popular for coffee, right? Why don't people start the day with a coffee? To which we had an answer that I gave them our answer. I asked the client that where are you based from? You're based in Mumbai, right? Mumbai is known for vada pav. When was the last time you had a vada pav? Do you have it regularly? Obviously, no. You have it once every 10 days or 15 days. Or if you're a good food, fond of vada pav, you'll have it alternate days, but not regularly, right? So now these are insights. When do insights come in? Is after you combine structured and unstructured data together. And how does it add value? Insights combined with meaningful actions provide value. And how you use it, how a company uses that insight for the benefit is what differentiates one company from the other. And this is how powerful insights are. So that you need someone to soak up that data, understand it. And I think that's the pivotal role that insight has in India right now. Yeah, Naveen.
I think Naveen is on mute.
I think, yeah, possibly.
Yeah, actually, sorry, I had a technical issue, so couldn't reply earlier, sir.
Yeah.
Hello, can you guys hear me now?
Yes, Sanat, we can hear you.
Yes, sir, we can hear
Yeah.
you now, sir.
Yes. Hi, Ayush. Hi, Niranjan. Pleasure to connect with you guys. Hi, Naveen. Thanks for inviting me here.
Hi,
Yeah, the
Sana.
pleasure is ours, Sanat.
Yeah. So, yeah,
Okay.
please tell me.
Yes, so finally, Sanat has joined us now. So we'll be asking our next question to Sanat himself. So, what do you think are the different ways an organization can foster an environment of statistics-driven innovation, sir?
So, one of the ways I feel that the most important way in which an organization can foster anything is through incentives. So, if an organization develops the appropriate incentive structure to accommodate and to encourage statistics-based research and like statistics-based decision making, that is the right way to go. For example, in hedge fund industry that I work in, one of the ways in which people encourage analytics-based and statistics-based decision making is by simply looking at the alpha that is generated. Like alpha is something that we call returns. So we simply look at the returns generated by individual portfolio managers, and the way that alpha is generated is through statistics. So if somebody is not using the right kind of statistics, or if somebody is not using the right kind of analytics, his alpha would not be as great as the other people. So, and the incentive structure is designed in a way that completely supports that. So, your bonus or your salary is completely based on the alpha that you're generating. So, in my view, that is a very effective way of doing things. But I'd like to hear other people's opinions also on this. What do you guys think?
Hey, Sanat, I like the approach when incentivizing, making sure your incentive mechanism is linked to the results. But sometimes what happens is, I think the question would be, how do we make these things into a process? Because making it a result driven incentive, or incentives being result driven rather than process driven, can sometimes instead of driving the culture towards it, can sometimes drive the culture in a completely different direction.
So one of the ways in which people do it, for example, in my organization or in my industry in general, is number one, the hiring is like the people who are hired from an analytics background. almost everyone who's hired is like they ensure that they have some knowledge of statistics, knowledge of analytics, so on and so forth. And additionally, the entire conversation revolves around that. For example, when we are presenting any results, or let's say even if when our organization is presenting any results to our investors, the way we do that is we show the conclusions that we've derived, and we show them the process by which we've derived it. And the process is a systematic process. It's based on data, it's based on solid data, and it's based on some kind of analytics that we perform on that data. So like I would say that this is a very top-down way of doing things. If your CEO thinks statistically, then your director would be thinking statistically, and then the way down to the most the bottommost researcher would be thinking the same way. What do you guys think?
Yeah.
Yeah, Sanat, I agree with it. But there's one aspect, there's one way to put it. The other way is design. Design can be data driven. Also, it can also be a result. It can be the starting point of data. Like a website works in a similar way. First, the UI and UX needs to be developed in such a way that it allows capturing data, right? What you're talking about is internal data structures. What I'm talking about is capturing data externally and coming in. That's where design comes. Design becomes more prominent. I'm looking at it from a customer's perspective, not from an incentivizing employees and incentivizing internal stakeholders. And design is one way to improve data capturing or data source, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, certainly. I would say that these differences, there are differences between different industries. For example, when you talk about a website, then you are targeting a certain kind of customer base, so your target is completely different.
Correct.
And for example, in the hedge fund industry, our target is completely different. So we are targeting investors. So our process is designed in a way as to convince the investors that we are generating the appropriate returns for them. Your process is designed in a way as to get the most number of customers and the most number of paying customers, I would suppose. So, but at the end of the day, I would think that it's definitely a top-down approach. If the head of the organization wants to build a data-driven process, he would be able to do that.
Absolutely, the leadership. Yeah, absolutely. The leadership matters. The vision matters. That's how you get the approach. Correct.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. The reason I was asking about the process and result-driven approaches is because we were consulting an insurance company, and all the sales reps had to go about making sure that they achieve their sales targets. Now they have been told that there are certain through different analysis they have been told that they are not to touch certain industries. But when the deadlines are near, they throw all those analysis in the bin and start going about left and right, taking up any industry or certain industries that they were asked not to not to target. They start targeting them and start onboarding those clients, because the sales target is what was driving their actions. Now what happened is, if we change that same incentive from sales to profit driven, or make it a profit driven incentive, because the claims from those customers that they started onboarding in the later half of their or nearing the deadline, if that had happened, then of course I completely agree, Sanat. The incentive structure would have been more properly devised. Does that make sense, guys?
Yeah, certainly. I think that's a very interesting way of looking at it.
Yeah, definitely, Ayush and Sanat and Niranjan. That was really a great way of understanding how and why in organizations are fostering such kind of environments, because that is really important for us to move towards the future. So now, if you want to understand, is innovation or a data-driven organization really very, very comfortable into steering their organization towards innovation than organizations that's a traditional with not so much capacity for technology changes in their legacy systems?
Yeah, of course, Naveen, yeah, of course. But when you're saying data-driven innovation, I think there's another line in between. You know, people sometimes confuse innovation with data-driven innovation. Now, I'll explain the difference. Organizations which have resources at their disposal tend to keep some techniques secret. You know, uh, for example, product development is kept a secret. Not everyone would like to come and openly discuss about how they develop a product or what goes into developing a product. They might provide a structure or a framework for students or academicians to learn. But in today's competitive world, I think that secrecy is needed. All right, data-driven innovation is new, okay, and they're project born. All right, after you find some trend or correlation in the data, uh, it can be in a form of a project, a process, or a concept, but the focal point is that something which has not been invented yet. That is what data driven innovation is. Correct. Like now I'm going to give an example of a company that we've recently launched a product called Steroset. It's India's first stethoscope sterilizer. All right, it helps strengthen an existing process of sterilization. Doctors basically have this system called post-examination hygiene, and we as a company wanted to improve that, make it more efficient, make it more easier for the doctor to do. All right. Uh, this is an example of data-driven optimization. We had some data and we optimized it. It's not an innovation, though people loosely say that it's a product innovation, but it's it's optimizing an existing system using a new product. Correct. Uh, this makes the existing system better, but there's no innovation here. True innovation is not there. Right. Now, both innovation, data-driven innovation, and data-driven optimization are essential for businesses. But data-driven innovation is something that allows you to get that uh, competitive advantage, because here you're exploring new opportunities. The competition is low, and you can get that first mover advantage as well. For this, you need to have a data-driven system, right? More so, data source needs to be very reliable, and there needs to be an infrastructure which keeps mining this data real time and keeps feeding it on your dashboard. Correct. But this is not enough. Like I said previously, you need to take action to convert something into insight, and then those meaningful actions uh, is where you combine everything together, you weave everything together, and come up with something new. So this is my take on data-driven innovation and data-driven optimization.
I think I would relate that to something like an incremental improvement in technology versus something like a complete disruption of technology. So what you're saying is saying as innovation. I understand that as a complete disruption, and what you're saying as optimization, that would be an incremental change in technology. Is that what you're referring to? If I
Absolutely, absolutely, yes.
Perfect. So I would just give a small perspective from my industry, for example. So
Yeah,
the way my industry works in the hedge fund industry, there are various decisions that we need to take. So the first and foremost day-to-day decision is the kind of portfolio that we want to organize. Like what's the composition of our portfolio, and this kind of a decision is taken completely on the basis of data. Like there's almost zero to like almost no human involvement here. So we look at the data. There's a pipeline which processes the data into portfolios. So because we don't want to introduce our human biases into this process. But then the kind of disruption that you're talking about, there a lot of human ingenuity comes around. So for example, if we want to decide whether or not to move into a new target or into a new class of assets, for example, if we want to move from equities to debt market, then that decision is based partly on data and partly on human innovation. Like we speak to people, we try and understand what the scenario is, we try and hypothesize what the market is going to be 6 months from now. So I would say there's a mix of both. And data does not really hamper us from technological innovation. It helps us make the right kind of innovation. So that's my 2 cents on that. What do you think, Ayush?
Yeah. So data drives this innovation. That is true. And innovation as a standalone also works if the culture is suitable for it. There is another thing that was very interesting that Naveen was talking about is legacy systems and the urge that the companies have to drive into these new innovations. So one thing we should all keep in mind, and I've seen this across clients, any new change, even though incremental, is rarely taken up with open arms. There is a lot of resistance, especially if it is a complete disruption. Okay, if it is a complete overhaul of their current processes, then there will be a lot of resistance that we'll have to take into account. That along with so hence not as somebody who is consulting, as consultants, our primary job not only becomes of coming up with these better ways of doing the same thing, or coming up with a newer way of doing the same thing. More than these things, it is also about managing your stakeholders, communicating with them, making sure that they become comfortable in it so that they adopt it. Otherwise, what happens is there will be a lot of innovations, and I've seen a lot of companies coming up with really great processes in one of their departments, but nobody else across the industry is adopting anything that they have created, and then they would start paying consultants like us a lot of money to just figure out that they already have something in one of their departments. So it's the change management process is really important to make sure that everybody is on board, everybody realizes that this new change has come about and is how useful it is for the overall organization.
Yes, as everyone just correctly pointed out, change is the only thing that is constant in any organization. People need to steer towards the data-driven innovation systems that have been coming up and will also be coming up soon in the future. And as analytics plays a very important role in innovation, data-driven organizations should foster such innovation strategies and cultures in the organization so that it is for their betterment that they can shape the future rather than just be seeing it being shaped by others. So next question would be to Mr. Ayush. As how do you think business analytics weigh under the times of unpredictability?
Can you repeat that?
The question was, sir, how does business analytics weigh under the times of unpredictability?
Well, if you're talking about the current situation, I understand that, but black swan events or anything that's unpredictable, it would be very difficult for any organization or any any predictive model to ever let you know that this is going to happen, or these are the possibilities. But what has happened recently is the models are not only predicting one scenario, they'll be predicting 2-3 different scenarios, and organizations are starting to create possible mitigating actions for each of those scenarios. So let's say the scenario one is you as an organization meet your revenue target. Scenario two is based on historical performances. Let's say, okay, there is a high possibility of you not meeting your historical targets. Now, what will happen is your models will start looking at what are the possible deficiencies that have led to you not meeting that not meeting your targets. So let's say you have not sold enough of product A in geography Z. Okay, so you then start realizing, okay, then what is the action that you need to start taking? You need to start making sure that there's a lot of communication, a lot of awareness, and a lot of a lot of effort put into selling product A in geography Z. So all of these things, mitigating actions or scenarios that are created for all of these things need to be taken into account. You cannot rely on one forecast or one prediction that's happening, especially in the times that we are in. Uh, and I've heard that there are organizations that have not one, two, but five: plan A, plan B, plan C, plan D, and plan E. If one fails, they have the other one, then they have the other one, and so on. So yes, times today are very unpredictable, but this is where analytics can help in figuring out what are the possible different scenarios, and using that using those insights, we can create what are the other actions that the organization can take so that they can stay afloat during these times. Thoughts, Sanat and Niranjan?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel that plans are necessary, backups are needed. But something, you know, a situation like a pandemic is something that organizations, even the largest ones, didn't thought of. And especially the product ones, who have invested so much in their supply chain, uh, growing up geographies, and then suddenly in one fine day everything stops. You have to come up with something new, and organizations sometimes do not have data for that. And collecting data, then working on it will take time, uh, and it takes a lot of investments. Plus, there are hurdles. All these things put together requires a considerable amount of time, and you probably, uh, as an organization, you start taking those precautions. And this mindset sometimes, stops innovation. Uh, and I've seen some organizations with really good supply chain uh, not meeting, failing to do that transition from uh, from physical stores to digital, uh, because they had the lack of understanding of digital markets. How things work in the digital world. I'm talking about big companies. Uh, that's when these small companies, who are agile, they quickly can capitalize on this. Uh, Giving you an example of Mama Earth, because I come from a product and consumer market, uh, I studied it, and Mama Earth sets up a really nice example. They actually were on a scale, on a trajectory where they had physical stores coming up. They had the products kept in physical stores, though they were an e-commerce website, right? But because of the pandemic, everything shut, and they had to quickly make a transition where they had to keep their products in nearby local physical stores so that they can deliver it to the customer on time. And that transition, I think Varun and Ghazal, they were speaking about it, that how that particular mindset saved the company, and now uh, physical stores, they are around 8 to 10% of the company's revenue, which is quite a lot if you see a year's worth of investment that they have put. So being agile is, I think, very necessary. And I'm talking from a consumer's perspective, product perspective. Yeah.
So, yeah, thanks, Ayush and Niranjan. I'll give my 2 cents about uncertainty and data-based decision making. So, in the finance industry, we deal with uncertainty on a day-to-day basis. If you look at the stock market, it is completely uncertain. You never know what is going to happen to which stock the next moment. So, our basic product is like our expertise is to deal in uncertainty, and the way we do that is we look for patterns in the like historical patterns. We look for historical patterns, and we try to derive the correlation between what has happened historically and the kind of data that we see today with the kind of returns that are seen in the future. And these are the kind of correlations which actually help us develop profitable strategies, for example. So like if we say uncertainty versus data driven decision making, I would say that data driven decision making is the solution of is kind of the solution of dealing with uncertainty, because uh, like we don't have any other tool at our disposal. The only thing that we have is data. Like things are going to change tomorrow. Like there is certainly like complete uncertainty in the market, but the only way we can like sort of mitigate that effect is using a lot of data, and that's what we do. We deal with a lot of data, we derive correlations, and we try to take positions based on that. Sometimes it hits us, for example COVID-19 crisis that Niranjan mentioned. So those are the kind of things that no amount of data can predict, and those are the kind of things that you need to be prepared for. You need to hedge against these kind of black swan events, and all in all, you need to make sure that your strategies are sort of robust against these kind of events. So that's broadly speaking, that's the kind of work that we do with uncertainty. What do you think, guys?
Yes, as correctly mentioned by Ayush and Sanand, that unpredictability is only persistent till the time we don't have data. As data comes in, we can counter those unpredictability times by checking out the historical patterns, the need of the hour, and thereby changing our strategies and modeling ourselves according to those times. So, according to Niranjan, what do you think as you have been in India for so long? What do you think as India a hub of growing digital infrastructures in terms of business analytics? And what do you think is their use in the security systems, in the digital infrastructures that have been coming up? Is there how do we counter the foreign market competitions in India now?
Yep. How AI and ML are very popular these days. I see, again, like I said, insights to be used, and companies will have data, right? Data will evolve from being the new oil to being the new air. It will be everywhere, a little polluted somewhere, okay, but it will be there everywhere. Making meaning out of it will be crucial, and professional scientists and experts, they will be needed to help people like us, like me, make most out of data. When it comes to India, this century belongs to us. Obviously, yes. India is leading not only in terms of sheer talent that we have, but also in how driven are we to solve problems. Like I see IEEE students or other analytics students very interested, very curious to know about all of these. Indians already have these analytical mindsets to learn and apply. They are jugadu. They find a way to make things happen. And with more and more students taking up analytics with the kind of enthusiasm that is seen, I can see in the next 5 to 10 years, I at the most 5 years, in fact, they'll be pivotal, and I'll not be surprised to see some brilliant India data-driven companies flourishing across the world, or maybe even Mars for that matter. But I see Indian companies actually, taking over some foreign companies. I would love to see that. When it comes to security and developing Indian infrastructure, I think our country's vision to be a digital economy or digitally very powerful is being is coming as a reality now. I think India, if you look at the COVID-19 crisis, India has been at the forefront. India has also been vocal about it. Though there are some socio-political issues which with differences that we have, but as a country as a whole, we are very well equipped to do so. I think Indian brands are more powerful than ever because of all of this. All these things come put together.
Sanatan, Ayush, your views on it?
So I agree that. Sorry, Sanat, you wanted to say?
No, please continue, Ayush.
Yeah, I agree with Niranjan when he says, that the resources at India's disposal that we have currently, we always were a very good IT providing nation, information technology providing nation for the last 20-25 years. The natural change from there or transition from there has been analytics, and I think that is where the future would be. So in the late 90s, early 2000s, NIIT was the company that everyone was talking about, because it was helping helping individuals learn a lot about IT programming languages like C, C++, and so on. Nowadays, it will be analytics institutes like, really big analytics institutes coming up in India, and you see all of this proliferation, and you will realize that India is going to be the hub for if for nothing, then at least for resources at the end, because one, we are very good at STEM. Okay, there is no doubt about that, and we are very good at figuring out solutions, as Niranjan has already talked about. So India, I think, is already at the top, if not in the top three. And I think we've already reached there. Some of our brilliant innovations, or some of our brilliant products that have been coming in, or at least from people who are of Indian origin, have been just remarkable. So I think we've done some really good work in analytics. Companies like Fractal and MuSigma and all of these have done really good work. And did take up the initial bandwagon. Now there are a lot of smaller companies coming in and doing that work. So I think we've already gone up, and yeah, as a nation, I think we are doing good. Sanat, sorry.
So, Ayush, so two of the things that you mentioned about MuSigma and Fractal, I completely agree with you. Like, they're doing some really interesting work in the field of analytics. And like, if you look at global players like Palantir and all, like I would say that places like Palantir, places like Google, and hedge funds like Two Sigma, Citadel, like they are doing, like, they are currently the world leaders in the field of analytics and natural language processing. But like, we have started working, like in India, we have started working, like some startups have started developing products which are sort of competing with international players. I would not say that they're on par with them as yet, but I think they're really building up slowly. And so my view about India as a hub of financial analytics is is multifold. So I look at analytics as a pipeline. So it starts with data. So the first thing that you need for analytics is high quality, timely data. Like, you need to ensure that your data is correct, it's in the right format, and it's useful. The second part of the pipeline is using NLP tools, using machine learning models, using statistics in order to generate some kind of inference from that data. And the third part is taking business decisions based on those inferences. So I think India, like the number of people we have and the number of qualified graduates that we have, we can actually make a huge disruption in the field of data gathering. There is a lot of interesting data available online, and one of the ways in which you can really earn, like you can build a big company and you can generate a lot of value, is simply by conglomerating a lot of data together and putting it in the right format and sending it across to other companies for analytics and for like using their models on that data. So a lot of companies, for example, in finance, we have companies like Bloomberg, we have companies like Compustat. So that's pretty much all that they do. They generate, they gather all the data, they gather all the news from different sources online, and they put it together in a specified format. And all of this is sent across to hedge funds, it's sent across to investment banks, and then those companies, they use their competency, they use their tools, they use their products in order to generate insights from that. So I would say I haven't seen a lot of companies in India which are doing this. I'm not aware. There might be companies, but I'm personally not aware of them. I think there's a huge opportunity in this area, and there's a possibility for a lot of disruption. Disruption in the sense of building a better data source, and disruption in the sense of building a cheaper data source. So if anyone's hearing this and if anyone thinks it's an interesting idea, then I would suggest them to put their mind into it.
Absolutely, Sanat. This is something that we've been constantly working on, even in my duration in Kantar, data source has always been at the focus. I think here dependency plays an important role. The more dependent you are on someone, the quality of the data goes down. Correct. So data sources, automatic data sources uh, are important, and I think companies do need to work on it. I completely agree with your point when you're saying that we need reliable data sources.
Yeah, because a lot of the conversation around analytics, I see that it like people talk about using models, people talk about using like for NLP, like we have BERT models, we have Word2Vec, we have like so many different models that are being used. Like continuously every 6 months, we have a new paper being published in EMNLP or in any of these conferences globally, and all of these companies, Google, Microsoft Research, Google Research, Facebook AI Research, all of them are working in this. All the universities are working on that. What I don't see is a lot of innovation in the field of data collection and data processing, because honestly, what we call this GIGO, like golden in, golden out, or garbage in, garbage out. So it doesn't matter how good your model is. If your data is bad, your results would be incorrect. So I would highly encourage people to think of ways in which to gather data and ways in which to gather correct data, like good data, timely data, and correct data, something which is verifiable, something which is usable by other companies. So
Yeah,
that is my two cents.
yeah, so there's one interesting point that you mentioned, garbage in, garbage out. Absolutely can relate to it because we've thrown some really good amount of data because they're absolutely rubbish. But when it comes to data collection, Sanat, I think digital is the way to go. But I think there's not a lot of innovation happening in India or even globally, is because I think data privacy issues, right? How Indians and how people are sensitive towards sharing the personal information online, and companies actually believe that this is the right way to collect data, reliable data. All right, is by actually not informing the respondents or having that gray area in between. Have some circles, loopholes around terms and conditions when it comes to data sharing. I think if a consensus is formed around this particular aspect of data sharing, uh, where we have some panels set up or something like that to help capture uh, good amount of consumer data, then I think we can see a lot of disruption happening in this field.
So I completely agree with you. This is an interesting point here. Like the conversation around data privacy is very important, and I think that is something that should be taken very seriously. My point is that even despite consumer privacy and all, even if publicly available data is used, a lot of times the kind of data that comes to companies is not very well processed. So we are talking about, let's say I am talking about like news stories. Like news stories are publicly available. Like data like company financials, like those things are like you get annual reports, you get quarterly reports. Like those things are publicly available. Just like simply if somebody is able to scrape that data, like scrape the PDF, scrape the Word document, scrape through the internet, and convert all of that into a usable format, into a spreadsheet format and a reliable spreadsheet format. Like even this simple process is value generating. Even this simple process will, I would say, this is the kind of data that companies would be willing to buy for a lot of money. So I think this is very interesting. And when you talk about consumer data, that is even one level up. If you can gather reliable consumer data, and if you can get it to, let's say, financial companies in a timely fashion, that is I see a huge business opportunity there. Because, and obviously, like we have to be compliant with all the GDPR laws and everything. But like considering all that, if people are able to do this, I see a huge business opportunity here, especially for a market like India, because I don't think a lot of global players are even. I don't think they're looking into the Indian markets too much right now. But over time, as the Indian markets are growing, I think the interest would grow, and like there's a huge opportunity in building good companies right now, because I think in the next 5 to 10 years, companies would be coming up in India. So if students are listening to this, I would suggest them to explore this area and to see if something can be done about it.
Absolutely, absolutely, Sanat.
I'm sure, Sanat, that most of us have heard that, and if nobody's taking dibs, I'm surely taking dibs on that business opportunity. I'll contact you directly on this. Yeah, so my next question would be to Ayush. As someone being in the prediction domain, my favorite question to you would be, how does a CEO make the balance between insight and intuition? Like, how does that chance of unpredictability cause a change in the output in business innovation?
Nice question. It actually, kind of depends on the character of a CEO, but on a general level, nobody would want to walk into a alley blindfolded. Nobody wants to walk into a small lane without any, without any lights on. Your analytics, all your data is the light. That is what is bringing more value to you. So why would you, as somebody who is paid only to take good decisions, uh, ever leave out any resource that will, let you take those good decisions? So CEOs nowadays would make sure all your eggs are covered, all your, everything is properly researched, all the analysis are properly done, all scenarios are taken care of, and then go ahead and take a decision. Now, but if you are in an industry where individual brilliance can matter, something like advertising, where you can come up with a campaign individually on an instinct and just go about doing it. uh, so if you are in such a kind of industry, then I think instincts would be very helpful. But in industries which are less individual driven, less creative, it would be very, very important for them to have go through the analytical rigor of that situation. And over time, what would happen is, once you start knowing your data well, your data would become your instinct going forward. So you would start having instinct based on your insights that you've already looked at in the past. So your instincts would then be driven on that. So that is how a CEO nowadays, they have started molding themselves towards this. Everybody started looking at all kinds of data that's available to make sure that because any decision that a CEO makes, is going to impact a lot of people, and a lot of resources are going to get impacted. So you want to make sure that you are not taking decisions on your whims and fancies, but it goes through a proper analytical rigor. And in the end, the CEO is answerable not only to his organization, but to the board of directors and their shareholders and the stakeholders. So they will make sure that they take the correct route. Sanat, Niranjan, your views?
So Ayush, I completely agree with you on this. In fact, I think you have captured the essence of this entire conversation about analytics. Basically, analytics is the guiding light that like basically lets you walk through this cave of business decision making. So there is like, honestly speaking, a CEO can be making decision based on his whims, but he'll just be fired because based on intuition are more often than not, I would not say incorrect, but they are incomplete. Like you need to use analytics. You need to use all the tools that are there at your disposal, and especially like you mentioned, advertising, which is a more individualistic industry. I would mention finance, which is like completely opposite of advertising. Here we like do not look at individual companies, for example. What we look at is an aggregate. Like in aggregate, what are the kind of companies which would be profitable? So in this field, like pretty much the most important thing is data-driven decision making, and nobody can be ignoring that. If you are ignoring that, your competition would just overtake you. And as soon as your competition overtakes you, your investors will leave you. You'll like your whole company would come crashing down. So like this is like in our field, this is not even debatable. Like you need to take like data-driven decision making, you need to present that data to the investors. You need to convince them that what you're doing is correct based on the process that you followed, based on the data that you've used. So all of that is taken into account. But I think you've perfectly summarized what I were to say. So yeah, that's my view. What do you think, Niranjan?
Uh, so Sanat and Ayush, I completely agree on this part. In terms of advertising, I can personally say that it's more creative. There are no rules. The thing about advertising is there are no rules to it. There is a process. Of course, there is a process. Advertising actually comes down to how well you execute it. All right. And once you execute it well, you start measuring all those, those metrics in terms of what are you trying to track? You're trying to track awareness, are you trying to track knowledge, whatever it is, right? So analytics for and advertising comes actually after the execution when you start to have data, when you collect data. But based on those data, based on the data that you've collected, the past data, you can come up with campaigns, is what I've seen. Right? Say for example, geographically speaking, we know that your particular product is not doing well in one geography. Right? Then you have an action point. Either it could be to build awareness, that could be one, or it could be something else. You can rework on the 4 P's there. So I think in advertising, I think it comes to agility, how agile the creative person is when it comes to creating a campaign or particular uh, running a particular campaign, and that's why I think data analytics comes in. Uh, in advertising, because there are no rules, it can either be a precursor. Data can either be a precursor to a campaign, or it can be used to measure what is working, what is not working. That's my take on advertising and analytics.
Yeah, makes sense.
As correctly pointed out by all three of you, a CEO, if only making decisions on intuition, he'll definitely be get fired, because now there are resources that are available by all means that they can collect and get a proper decision and a proper way forward to managing their organization. So definitely that definitely helps around. My next question is to Sanat sir. IEEE with a vision of technology innovation has always tried to use technology to help counter social issues. With your vast experience, what do you think are some of the changes that students can bring using analytics in the social domain?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Naveen. Firstly, I would mention that my experience is definitely lesser than that of Ayush and Niranjan. So I want to make that distinction here. But I'll give my 2 cents about this. So so one of my personal pet peeves with the social sector is that a lot of focus is given on symbolism and on imagery, and not on data-driven decision making. For example, if you look at a lot of appeals that are done for social causes, the way that they appeal to us is by like for example, photographs of hungry children or something of that sort. Like it's a very emotion driving imagery that they present to us. And I definitely agree, it's very important. It's very important to feed children. It's very important to take care of the social issues surrounding that. That's not my that's not what I'm against. But what I feel is that the focus of the social sector should be to maximize utility for the maximum number of people that are out there. And the way to do that ideally should be by using data. So instead of looking at individual stories, what we should look at are metrics. Whether, for example, the infant mortality rate in a particular area, is it improving or not? If we are taking certain steps, is it improving? Let's say something else like hunger rate or unemployment rate. Is that reducing or not in a certain area? Like if we are taking steps in order to improve that. So, for example, some people have come around to this, like the Gates and Melinda Foundation. They are using a lot of data in order to like structure their decisions around social service. But the traditional NGOs and even government organizations, I think that there is still a long way to go in order to move into this direction. And my point here is very straightforward. Like the purpose of this whole exercise is to improve the lives of as many people as much as we can. And we should not really abstain from using whatever tools are available to us in order to do that. So, for example, if let's say the government is taking a certain certain step. Let's say it's distributing food, like the PDS system. The PDS system, public distribution system, it is distributing food in a certain area of some remote area of Chhattisgarh or Odisha, let's say. And let's say that particular effort is not working because of whatever reasons. But some other policy might be working because of whatever reason. Like, let's say instead of directly distributing food, if it were to, I don't know, like give farm subsidies and all, maybe that is helping people more. Then they should take that decision instead of, like, although distributing food sounds better, instead of taking that decision, they should move into the field of, they should move their policy from food distribution to farm subsidies. So this whole approach is something that I'm advocating for here. But I don't know if this sounds very naive or if it sounds incorrect. So I would definitely love to hear from you guys. Like, what do you guys think? Does this sound workable? Does this sound like it could add some value?
So I think it does. It makes sense. My understanding in terms of social innovation is that it's a collaborative effort. Like, you can't work in singular silos. There has to be some transparency to solve these issues. Businesses are more rigid, as you understand, because they are looking for opportunities to grow, identify new sources of businesses, and they are more secretive. So transparency goes out the window most of the time when it comes to dealing with such issues. Students, I think, can help here. What you say, you know, I can say that students are present at the grassroots level. That they can help with the execution. Also, in terms of creating innovative ideas to execute these. Correct. Uh, you know, Social issues are something which I feel is still uh, pretty unorganized. We bring some organization to this can help. Like you said, feeding children is necessary. Uh, I actually am connected to a lot of animal welfare organizations. I have an injured crow in my house right now because I saw him yesterday injured and there were dogs around him. So I put him in my bag and got him home because it was late. So I would say, right now I faced the challenge yesterday that whichever animal welfare organization I called up 20-25 organizations. They all were non-responsive, right? So there needs to be a framework. It needs to be organized. Uh, maybe we can have a mechanism or an innovation that helps connect volunteers with those that need help, and have a monitoring mechanism also in place. I mean, I would love to help with that. Absolutely would love to help with that. But I think being organized is one way to look at it. Having structural frameworks ready, then I think all of these executions will matter and will be making most out of it.
I like the point where collaboration between social organizations is not happening a lot. I'll give an example that's completely on the other side of that. I don't know if you all have. I'm sure many of you all would have heard about the Grameen Bank model or the micro lending model that's prevalent throughout India also, but started in Bangladesh. These micro lending institutions, they organize their data and share it across all different micro lending institutions. So they will let anybody new entering a particular village, and when they are starting to lend to women, micro lending is mostly done to women so that they can start their small businesses, and it's given in a form that it's given to multiple women together in front of everybody, so that everybody knows that they have given, which makes default rates very low, because out of shame and out of everybody knowing that everybody's social status, that they would return the money back. So this is the model, and when they realize that in a particular village, certain kind of women have stopped giving out money back, and are not returning money, these organizations would communicate to each other, make sure that no other organization is going there and lending to the people of that village. So there is a lot of collaboration happening on that end. and which I think it was very nicely done by all these microfinance institutions. And on the other end, I see that the biggest social player in any country is the government. There is no bigger social organization in any country, and all the decisions that the government is making, if they do not have, or if they are not going to take decisions based on either past hypotheses that have been proven right or wrong, or that any policy decision that has been, like Sanat was talking, if you do, if you take policy A, and if you see that the result of policy A is not as good, and if you see a certain other state doing something else where where policy lending to farmers or giving them cash handouts is better, then start doing that. Or any other policy which would impact more people using lesser resources. All of these things would be very helpful, but that would require some vision from the government. That would require a lot of effort put in. And this is just a small tidbit around. US a few years ago was one of the few countries that had a chief data scientist of the organization, or chief data scientist to the US president. Currently India does not have one, but that was a very bold statement coming from the president. He was a chief data scientist to President Obama. So that was a very, very bold statement coming in, that the country is going to start looking at data and is going to start analyzing any information coming in only on the basis of data. And I think our government could learn a lot from it, and other social institutions could learn a lot about collaboration from all these smaller other players, like the microfinance institutions.
So, in addition, Ayush, that's very interesting. Like you mentioned, Mohammed Yunus's microfinance initiative in Bangladesh. I would like to mention one more initiative. So, for example, in Singapore, like Singapore is one of the nations which is, in my opinion, it's very well run, very efficiently run, very well run. So, one of the ways in which they control car ownership is by uh, putting a lot of taxes, a lot of extra taxes on a car. So, for example, if you want to buy a very normal car in Singapore, that a very normal car like Honda City, which costs like I think 10 to 15 lakhs in India, it costs like 1 crore rupees in Singapore. So, why I bring this up and why is this socially relevant is because the reason that they do that is the most efficient way of controlling car ownership, and that is something that they found out using a lot of data, using a lot of analytics on like the several kind of policies that they could have enacted in order to control that.
So
Things
this
like control.
Yeah, so
Sorry.
this actually goes back to your original, statement, that we need to incentivize things that we want to happen. If we want people to buy cars that are or are polluting a lot more, then you would start giving subsidies on them, as opposed to electric vehicles, where you would want to, or where you would maybe, incentivizing them or giving them subsidies on electric vehicles versus taxing the traditional models.
So
100%.
I
Yeah.
think I think one interesting aspect when it comes to Indian mentality or Indian demographics is that uh, you know how things are with price hikes, right? I mean, you can actually see protests happening because the fuel prices increase. I think that's the one way to
Mm-hmm.
tackle. Yeah, I think that's one way to tackle. Indian markets react differently as compared to other markets. Indians are more emotionally driven. We don't like to be penalized a lot. In fact, no one likes to be penalized a lot. I mean, Japan is the opposite, of course. I mean, if Japanese people see that they're making a mistake, they come out and say that, hey, I made a mistake and I need to be penalized, right? But Indians are a little different. Uh, I think in terms of tackling social issues, yes, collaboration is absolutely necessary. But we need to take into account Indian mentality, because we Indians, we resist change. We don't want things to change quite a lot, right? Unless it's needed. Like if it's easy, we adopt quickly. How we adopted digital India, like something on those lines is needed in terms of bringing out societal changes. But the left and right extremism in India can hamper society, tackling societal issues a lot. I think intent matters. That it all comes down to intent. If you have that intent to make a change, I think then the change will happen in India. Speaking prospectively from India.
No, definitely. Political will is the first thing that is needed for change. Like any kind of change will only come if there is political will. Like Ayush mentioned that there was a chief data scientist position in the Obama administration in US. And that only happened because Obama had that foresight and that political will to implement that. If you want change in any society, this is something that is needed pretty much. It's irreplaceable. Like you can't have any kind of positive change without the political will to support that. So yeah, completely makes sense here.
And I've heard this argument a lot, Niranjan, that Indians are a more emotional society. The left and right extremism is too much, but I think that's true for all societies. Because human mentality for resisting change across is the same. I would not put that as a deficiency only in India, but I would say. Yes, social organizations in India could do a lot more, could do a lot better, and that is true for all organizations throughout the world also, because collaboration is not as easily done by social organizations, and of course, all of this would be down to personal egos and personal visions or personal objectives. But I think human mentality throughout is the same. You are resisting change, and it would be very difficult for people to just adopt anything new coming in.
That's absolutely true, because today technologies, different initiatives are being coming up daily. Like if we are not beheft of it, people will take advantage, and of course, politics definitely plays a major role, because if there's no politics, people will really not be helping out each other. So as we come close to our ending, we'll also have to keep up our promise of giving the attendees a chance to ask their questions. So first we have Saloni Shah, who will be asking some questions to the panelists. Saloni, over to you.
Good afternoon, panelists. I have some questions to ask. First, when you were talking about the organizations, like what they will do to foster environment, there was one point that said that design helps to improve data capturing and data source. So, can you throw some light on that?
Yeah, Saloni. So I think I brought up that issue of design, collecting, helping out in collecting data source. See, data collection is complex. It's a right now, if you have those traditional paper and pencil interviews, these are very long questionnaires. No one likes to fill long questionnaires. The more easier it is for someone to fill a questionnaire or give out information, I think it's better. You get better data. Gamification is one way that we try to explore, putting objects in baskets, all those things. They help to a certain extent, but the amount of data that you're collecting, the number of questions that you have, uh, they actually result into respondent fatigue. In fact, when a person is doing an interview, it also leads to interviewer fatigue, and that reduces the quality of data. Now, you can counter that using a better design. Like we ran India's longest questionnaire, 3 hours. It had to be completed in 2 sittings. We suggested to the agency that we reduce the questionnaire size, we remove the unwanted questions, but uh, the design of the questionnaire was such that it did not allow us to do it. Right now, this is something that could have been done at at sectional level, because uh, the questionnaire actually captured uh, the entire habits of Indians throughout, not just one particular industry. We were capturing for the auto sector, for FMCG, health and beauty, personal care, everything. So now, if they were sectionalized and collected, then it would have been better, resulted in lesser respondent fatigue. Here's where design comes in. If you've got a better design, then you can probably counter those challenges easily. Uh, one way to do it is through an app where you can have a lot of gamification done, like how Amazon does. Like to capture interest, how interested people are, they run gaming campaigns. Obviously, these are sponsored, but they run gaming campaigns just to see if someone is interested in a product or not, right? And if people are interested, then the platform algorithm pushes the product forward because they know that people are interested, they'll stay on the app longer. That's where design comes in. Amazon has a beautiful user interface, to capture data, and that's why Amazon Marketing Services (AMS) is so expensive. It's so expensive to run ads on. Correct. Similarly, Google has all the data. It's a single line that they have for information search, and that's how they capture data because the design is easy. Understood?
Saloni, your next question.
Yes, sir. My next question is regarding the Black Swan events. So, during those events, the situations are very unpredictable, like what will happen. So companies cannot keep only 2, 3 backup plans. They have to keep even more. So, how they collect data during those events, and keeping COVID crisis in mind, how do they deal with collecting data?
So the data collection process does not change. It stays the same. Um, your data collection is going to stay as it was earlier. Your interpretation of data will change. Your baselines will change. What your baseline was, and there will be a change in psychology of people because of the event happening, and which will drive a lot of other decisions going forward. So data collection is not going to change. The data collection stays the same because all of that was automated. If it was automated prior to prior to the event, but what will change is the way you interpret the data. Now all your baselines are different. Now everything, yesterday the GDP results came in and it said, India has grown 0.4%. That simply means that India has grown 0.4% on a base that has already gone down by 9 to 10%. So all these are the change in inferences that you'll have to start thinking about, and the change in human psychology is one of the things that happened was automobile vendors sold a lot of automobiles in last September or October, and that was simply because of pent up demand. No automobiles were sold in May June time frame last year, and there was a lot of pent up demand that was there. And what happened was, okay, all of this pent up demand got satisfied during this October November period, and they are now back to their earlier normal. So changes is the base. Your interpretation, the data collection strategy still remain the same. You want to capture as much of data that is possible, be as comprehensive, but make sure your interpretations are correct.
Thank you, sir. My next question is regarding the new WhatsApp policy, the privacy one. So, as you all said, that people are always sensitive to their personal information being public. So, what kind of consequences WhatsApp can face? So, will it remain as strong and in the market? Like the India has a lot of big users for this platform, and many of them are very much uh, uh, comfortable using this platform. So will they, if they drop this policy, will things change or it will still remain the same regarding the privacy issues of WhatsApp?
So Saloni, when it comes to WhatsApp, like it already has a considerable amount of network effects coming to picture. Like BlackBerry tried it, but because of model restrictions, they could not. WhatsApp is something that works on almost every phone that anyone has, and it's already built up that network effect, right now. So transitioning will require some major disruption, right? People are habitualized to it. Uh, it's like most of the people just agreed to the policies without even reading what they are, because the pop-up came in such a way. I, for example, I just happened to misclick on agree without reading on it, right? So it can have negative. Obviously, holding individuals, what we say, holding them to something is not good. Like WhatsApp did, that you agree to the policy or stop using it. That was not needed. All right. Uh, but I think people are more habitualized to WhatsApp now than they are to other instant messaging apps. Major disruption will be needed to make the transition from WhatsApp to any other app for that matter.
Thank you, sir.
I think our next question is from Yash Thakre. He'll be asking the question to the panelists now. Over to you, Yash.
Yeah. My question was regarding the future of cryptocurrencies in a digital payment system globally. So, what the central banks are doing currently is that taking the best technologies from the cryptocurrencies, which were meant for decentralization, but they are trying to create a, I would say, metaphorically, create a Frankenstein monster out of it. They're trying to build a ultimate centralization in digital currencies, which was completely antithetical to what the cryptocurrencies were built for. So, what your views regarding that? And also India's regulation regarding Bitcoin and private currencies, cryptocurrencies.
Okay. Uh, yes. Let's say you are running. You are running a shop, and you are the only person selling ice cream in that area. Okay. You have a monopoly of that area, and nobody else is selling ice cream in that area. The moment some new vendor comes in, you are going to try whatever means possible to make sure that ice creams are not sold from that other vendor. That is exactly how government of India is reacting to another currency coming in when the government has already issued a currency. When you have a monopoly, you do not want to let go of it. That is one. Two, the reason Bitcoin was created as an asset or any other cryptocurrency was because people those creators did not have too much faith in the fiat currencies that are going around today. Fiat currencies, as in the currency that you and I use today, is backed by nothing but our belief that the government is going to work. Okay, so tomorrow, if the government falls and there's nothing happening, we could, like Venezuela, end up where our currency notes could be completely useless. So all the countries in the world are using fiat currencies. There used to be a gold standard, but now there isn't. Now, because of this, the creators of cryptocurrencies, and I'm going to use Bitcoin as because that was the first one, is happened was that they did not have enough faith in the fiat currencies, and fiat currencies are only built on faith. Okay, so they created a currency or a coin that would be helpful to transact and would be based completely on the economic principles of demand and supply. You do certain work, you and then use it for different purposes. Governments are going to resist it as much as possible because they do not want to let anybody in, and it's simple. It is somebody else is getting in the way of the government's job that the government is currently doing, and that is managing currency, money supply in the country. So of course they are going to be resistant to that change. Make sense? Yes.
Yeah, completely. I would also like to highlight what is happening in China, where the communist government is completely creating databases, huge databases of their population. They are contact tracing it by means of where the person makes payments, what he does, what he thinks, or what he type about his political views. I think this question not only comes forward in terms of economy, but also in terms of liberty of a person, and also individualism as a nation, as a collective nation as a whole, I think. So what do you think we propose as a collective citizens of this country look forward in adopting cryptocurrencies?
Yes. The points that you have brought up are very varied and beyond the control of even governments in India or outside. Okay. Many governments themselves are coming up with their own cryptocurrencies. That is simple because they don't want to lose out to the competition. Indian government may also bring out their own cryptocurrency, like China has done, like Estonia has done, and some other nations across the world. So that's going to happen. As opposed to questions surrounding a person's individuality, their freedom, the ability to move around without being analyzed or their data getting captured, that will depend on country to country and individuals in that country. And it's not only China. India as a country is also doing that. The Arogya Setu app is also doing that. And the purposes are different, but it's still monitoring every movement that an individual is going to make. So there are a lot of the complete Aadhaar system. All of that is in a way kind of tracking everything, but the intentions are very different as opposed to the communist government. But things are happening. Everybody is getting monitored. Everybody is getting analyzed, and yeah, we need to be very aware of what is getting analyzed in a manner that is good for a thriving democracy, as opposed to something that is going to stop voices from getting heard. Make sense?
Yeah, completely. By the way, we are running an organization which is proposing to put forward a fight regarding what the government is doing. So feel free if anyone wants to get in touch with us.
Sure, yes, we'll take that into consideration. Our next question seems to be aimed to Sanat. Sanat, a student has asked you to give us some pointers on how to successfully and usefully scrape financial reports and investor calls. I think Sanat is facing some technical issue. Still, we'll come back to him as soon as possible. Our next question would be using
I think most of these organizations nowadays have started giving out information in Excel formats and PDF formats that are easy to now look into and convert. Sanat, if you could throw more light on that question. Can we hear him? No, I don't think. But okay, Sanat.
I think sir is not able to hear anything. I think so. So we'll continue with this question, sir.
Yeah. Yeah, so all of this is now currently available a lot because they have to send all of this data to the exchanges back, and the exchanges have started demanding that data in a certain format. So organizations are doing that. That data is available in a format that can be easily analyzed. At least that is happening. But what is not getting analyzed is the question and answers or the management discussion that happens. And for that, really advanced NLP tools that Sanat was talking about would be required. So yeah, there are a few areas where analytics can be used for better data gathering.
Okay, I think so. Sanat is now here with us. Sanat?
Yeah, I can hear you guys now. I'm so sorry. There was some, I think there was some technical problem because of which I was not able to hear anyone. So if you can just tell me what the question is.
Yeah, sure. The question actually was directed to you. The question was, could you give us some pointers on how to successfully scrape financial reports and investor calls? This was a question from the Q&A section, sir.
Okay, so very interesting. Okay, I have a disclaimer here. I cannot divulge the details regarding this. A lot of the stuff that we work with is proprietary and it's under non-disclosure. But what I can suggest is you have a lot of publicly available data, so you can look at various companies. For example, let's talk about the Indian stock market. You have Nifty. So Nifty is a group of like 50 companies. You can, and all of these companies are publicly listed companies. They have their website, and on the website they'll have an investor relation page. The way to do it, like I'm giving a very simple example. This is not how it's. This is not the state of the art in the industry, but unfortunately, I cannot discuss the state of the art in the industry. So what I suggest is you go to the investor relation page for these companies, and you get the annual filings, and you're able to, if like the annual filings are generally in the PDF form, if you're able to somehow scrape the PDF, get the important pieces of data from there. uh, and you also mentioned calls, right? Investor calls or something, Naveen?
Yes, investor calls.
Investor call. So there are very interesting data sets for investor calls. Again, I cannot get into the details here, but one of the ways in which, so these calls are sometimes available publicly, but how you can add value is if you can classify the calls into its various sections, and if you can what do you say, if you can do some like interesting analytics on your end, in the sense that at least not analytics, but if you can do some cleaning on your end, if you can remove the unwanted stuff from the calls, like what companies like ours are interested in, are the figures, are the numbers, are like basically we want to draw inferences from all of this information. And a lot of the conversation which happens is just like pleasantries, for example. So those are things that we're not interested in. So if you can remove all of that unnecessary stuff, get the data in a tight format, in like you can just extract the useful bit of data from there, and you can draw a pipeline which connects the entire process. Like if you can draw a pipeline which gets the data from the internet, does the processing, and submits it to, like, sends it across to your client, and if you can do this entire process in real time, like reduce the lag, reduce the latency, if you can do that, that's a huge business opportunity. Like I know companies which I cannot name, which have made millions and millions of dollars simply doing this thing. So this would be my 2 cents regarding this. What do you guys think? Hello?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think, Ayush?
Yeah, makes sense. I was telling them the same thing earlier, that a lot of information is available on their websites, and if they can convert the PDFs into proper, nice, analyzable formats, that would be very helpful. Yeah.
So as bellwethers to the business intelligence industry, students want to know what are the key strengths of a business analyst and what they should do or learn to stand out as a professional in the BIA industry.
Sorry, Naveen, can you repeat that?
Students would like to learn something new and something different each day. So they want to ask, like, how do they stand out in the business intelligence industry? What are the key skills that they should learn or they should be proficient in?
So the only way to stand out in any industry, I think, is not the tools and techniques, but how you are applying them. How are you solving a particular business problem? But if you've asked for tools and techniques, there are a lot of tools that people are using in this industry nowadays. Languages like R, Python, tools, visualization tools like Power BI, Tableau. All of these things are available, and you can learn about all of these things, and they are very easy to learn also. But the most important in any of these conversations is that people need to make sure that they understand the business context, can figure out a solution, and then use that tool to implement that solution and measure how that tool is working, or measure their solution, and get back and again iterate the same process. It is not a one-time thing, it will be a continuous thing. And if people can get into this mindset, I think that is how they will start showing value, that they are becoming better every time that they are doing something. Sanat, Niranjan, your views?
So for students, like definitely your this thing is very important. You need to understand the context in which your work is being carried out. Let me give some very specific suggestions if you want to work in the analytics industry. One is you need to have a very smart, you need to have a very strong grasp on mathematics, on statistics and programming, especially programming in Python and R. Using tools like Pandas, using tools like Keras, NumPy, like all of these things. I would say all of these things are useful. They're used in the industry, in the analytics industry broadly. In addition to that, it's very hard to learn analytics as such from taking courses and from, I don't know, just reading books. It's a very applied subject. So the best way to learn it would be through internships, through experience, and through projects. So my suggestion would be apply for internships or do some real world projects. Look at places like Kaggle. Like they have a lot of projects for students. Like they offer a lot of interesting projects. So you can try and solve, like do some of those problems. Like obviously in the beginning, you'd not be able to do it very well, but over time, you'll improve your skills and you'll be able to add some value to it. And yeah, in these would be my broad suggestions. Niranjan, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with what you mentioned when it comes to analytics being more applied. You need to have practical knowledge about it. But from my interactions, I interact with students a lot, and I've been mentoring around 60-65 students in the last 6 months. What I've understood is, first you need to be sure of whether you want to get into analytics or not, because analytics is actually a field where your mind is constantly awake. You need to be curious. So curiosity is needed when it comes to business analytics. So you need to understand the subject, like you mentioned. My suggestion on how to move as a student is first to find a mentor. I cannot stress enough on this fact that you need a mentor to help you out with analytics, especially with such a technical field. Second is mentors are a great way to be connected with the topics that you need to be updated with. So finding a mentor is very important. Connect with your mentors once a week, have your doubts ready, prepare a bullet points of what you need to understand, and work on the suggestions that the mentors give. Okay. Second, to be industry ready, you need to have working knowledge, like you mentioned. It's more practical, it's more applied. Analytics is tricky, it's difficult here because you need to have some software that you mentioned, right, with the industry uses, and these softwares are expensive. So not every student may afford this. Sanat, you correctly pointed out, to gain working knowledge, you probably need a few months of internship experience, right? But you know how these companies are when it comes to securing internships, that you need to have some prerequisites, which includes certain amount of certifications, right? So my suggestions on approaching in your approach to make a career in analytics is, number one, to understand what analytics is and choose it as a career if you have the discipline to pursue it. Second, find a mentor. Third would be to get certified and then secure internships. Make sense?
I'm sure these pointers would have enlightened the students on how to approach their career and go ahead with it. So now, as much as we would like to continue this session, we would have to conclude this because of the future engagements that have been arranged for. So as we come to an end of this panel discussion, I would like to thank all of you for your insightful knowledge and to take us on this deep ride in the world of business analytics. The knowledge we have gained from you all is irreplaceable, whether it was Mr. Anand sharing his insights on the domain of finance, Mr. Ayush with your knowledge in data science and analytics, and Mr. Niranjan for guiding us through marketing management. It was truly a pleasure learning from you, sir, and thank you again for your valuable time. We now conclude the session.
Thank you.
Thank you, Naveen.
Thank you, Naveen. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. And it was a pleasure talking to Sanat and Niranjan. Thanks.
Absolutely, Ayush.
Yeah, same here. Yeah, would be happy to connect with you guys and to connect with the students if they have any further questions. Do let me know, Naveen.
Sure, sir. We'll be letting you know of any questions that come forth, sir.
Definitely. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
All right.